Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Mental Architecture, Building the Mind One Moment at a Time. And this is the web series that goes through my book section by section, explaining things in a little bit more detail. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 2, Section 2, which is Past, Present, and Future. In the previous video, we talked about how the brain creates your sense of time through the circadian rhythm and through other automated processes throughout your body, but we really didn't get into psychological time that much, except at the end when we talked about a certain phenomenon where time appears to go slower than it actually does. But even that was related to the saccadic eye movements. So I wanted to open up this section, like I do with some of the other ones, with an inspirational quote. This quote is from researchers L. Nyberg et al. Subjective time cannot be the same clocking calendar time that figures prominently in physical sciences and governs many practical affairs of everyday life, because past and future, necessarily defined with respect to a sentient observer, do not exist in the physical reality, but are products of the human mind. So when we talk about the past and things that happened long ago, I want you to think a little bit deeper about that. When you study history, what past are you studying? What events are you looking at? Did events that occurred 100, 200, 300 years ago, are they part of your past? Whose past are they a part of? And the answer is subjective. They're a part of the past, maybe of the city you live in, of the nation that you live in, or past of the world you live in, but all of these events that have been recorded in history occurred from someone's frame of reference, and these events were at one time somebody's imagined future. Not a future they could have necessarily predicted, but a future nonetheless. And when you think of things that are going to happen in the future, whether they're as mundane as brushing your teeth at night, or aspiring to become a doctor, or write an awesome book, or be in a movie, really no matter what is in your mind, these events are all grounded in experiences you had in the past. So another interesting thing is that the regions in your brain that light up when you think about the past and when you think about the future are actually the same regions. They're indistinguishable from a neurological point of view. So it really makes you wonder about what exactly past and future are. While we physically might not be able to travel through time in the sense that we like to, mentally we can. And that phenomenon is known as chronesthesia. And what chronesthesia is basically a subjective awareness of time, and it requires you to be conscious in order to really experience it. If you're unconscious, you can't really experience the passage of time because you're not aware to experience it. So some researchers have kind of equated consciousness with subjective time perception. Now, as you're going about your daily life, time seems to flow pretty easily from one moment to the next. But if you stop and think for a second, and I know I'm saying for a second in this moment, what exactly is a moment? What is your brain presenting to you? Is it presenting you a continuous flow of information without any breaks at all, except when you go to sleep at night? Or is there something else going on? Is what you're seeing truly the present? Or are you seeing something that already happened in the past? Or are you seeing something that's not necessarily even there, but rather your brain's construction of it all? Researcher Mark Whitman, who works in psychophysics, kind of dealt with this question of what the present is by dividing it up into a tripartite structure, which he was inspired by a German philosopher for this structure. And so this structure consists of three elements. The first element is retention, which is where your brain draws upon familiar patterns from the past to make sense of incoming sensory data. And then that is followed up by impression, which is where your brain decides what you're going to see. You actually see it, you experience this interpretation. And then potention is where your anticipation of what's to come in the next moment kind of leads your brain to start searching into what it's seeing. So these three are kind of tied together. Now obviously that's a little bit confusing. So Whitman broke things down even further. So researcher Whitman breaks down the present moment into three sort of sub-moments. And these three sub-moments also act as tools for your brain to process what's happening around you. So the first of these three moments is called the functional moment. And There's a lot of stuff that happens during this moment, but the basic purpose of this moment is to help distinguish one event from another and build to where you can tell what comes first and what comes second. I mean, after all, in order to order events, we have to know whether A came first or whether B came first. So within the functional moment, there's different what are called temporal order thresholds for when your brain is actually able to tell apart two events. Now, for auditory stimuli, this typically occurs around 2 to 3 milliseconds. For tactile or touch stimuli, that's like 30 to 50 milliseconds, and it varies a little bit for visual stimuli. But the bottom line is that the brain has certain thresholds at which it simply can't even tell apart two separate events. So think about that. Event A actually happened before event B, but to your brain, they must have happened at the same time if they happen too close together. So there's certain sweet spots where basically an event can be separated from another one. And then beyond that, in terms of being able to actually order that, that's a whole nother thing. So just being able to tell two events apart is not necessarily enough to order it. So you have to go up in time a few more milliseconds in order for that to happen. And so there's neurological correlates to this, and Whitman thought that the anterior insular cortex in the brain is what is responsible for helping to order this. The key thing about a functional moment is that it has no subjectively experienced duration to it. And I'll give you a really easy to understand example. As I'm talking to you right now, your brain is processing the vibrations that are going to your eardrum and being processed by different parts of your brain. You're also looking at me talking visually, and you're breathing, and all these other things are going on. But if these things are happening too rapidly, you're not going to be able to really break down what exactly happened first, and even some of my utterances will kind of appear to flow together more than they probably should. You might hear air conditioning in the background. All these things are being processed by your brain, and you just can't place an order to it. The second of Whitman's perceptual tools for processing the passage of time is the experienced moment. And so this usually occurs in about 2 to 3 second intervals, and this is what you experience as your nowness. And so this consists of a bunch of functional moments that are all kind of blended together to give you a kind of piece of reality. And funny things can happen here too. So as an example of how the meaning of something can change during an experienced moment, let's consider the following statement. So what if I tell you you're lying? If I say you're lying, that means you're not telling the truth. And you're probably going to get offended by that. But then we could quickly change that by me saying you're lying in bed. So now all of a sudden the word lying changes the meaning of it. But it doesn't change until you hear in bed. But it's as if the word lying always meant that you were lying in bed, even though I said it before I said in bed. So your brain kind of clumps it all together, even though I said the word lying before I said in bed. So you have to pay attention to the ordering of words sometimes, because your brain will string them together in a certain way to give meaning to a word I said before in a different moment after. The metronome for musicians is a very useful tool for setting tempo, and this tool also has some interesting properties that correlate with Whitman's experienced moment. So if you play a metronome at about a 2 to 3 second interval, then your brain automatically accents after every third beat. And it's a really weird phenomenon, totally subjective, and you can't help it. And that helps you kind of with establishing a rhythm. When a metronome goes too slowly and it's spaced way too far apart in time, you got a beat occurring once every 5 or 6 seconds, and they just appear in complete isolation from each other, and your brain won't accent every third note quite like it does when they're appearing closer in time. But if they appear too close together, way too close, then you just kind of hear it as one continuous note almost. You won't really notice the separation. So there's something special about that 2 to 3 second window, and I'd like you to listen to this metronome and see if you can hear yourself accenting after every third note. In fact, it turns out that the sweet spot for forming an imaginary rhythm, even if one doesn't necessarily exist, is between about 250 milliseconds and 2 to 3 seconds. Anything beneath that might sound too close together, and anything beyond that might sound spaced too far apart. And you even see this with dance movements and other rhythmic body movements. It's not just confined to music. And so it kind of bridges an important, connection between rhythm and time. Like our life kind of has a certain rhythm to it as we experience it. And if it doesn't, then things just appear like they're all kind of clumped together. And if things occur too far apart, they just appear to be, that's where we would say, well, that definitely happened way in the past. The third and final tool of Whitman's time perception is considered mental presence. So mental presence can be thought of the collection of experienced moments, one occurring right after another, and it sort of gives you a sense of time. And a perfect example of this is when two people are engaged in conversation between each other. The conversation is what's taking place, and then the words they exchange back and forth, that forms different experience moments between them. Now, if everything goes quiet for, let's say, 10, 15 seconds, now the focus shifts and the mental presence is more focused on the silence and maybe the uncomfortable feelings around it. The conversation is flowing really well, then you don't have that awkwardness necessarily. So basically, you've got these three building blocks: the functional moment, the experienced moment, and mental presence that all work kind of together. In my next video, we're going to talk a little bit more about mental presence and some of the issues that occur with it when we discuss memories. I just want to thank everybody for watching this video, and please don't forget to like, subscribe down here, and comment below. You can also watch my past videos, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you. Have a great day.